Your hands sweat before a fight.
Yul Brynner personally requested Steve McQueen for the film and spent the entire shoot regretting it. The score was composed by a man on a Hollywood blacklist, and the film that became one of the greatest westerns ever made was itself a remake of a Japanese film that Kurosawa modeled on John Ford. Fact 1. Brynner stole Quinn's idea. The idea of remaking Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai as an American Western did not originate with Yul Brynner alone. Brynner and Anthony Quinn had been developing the concept together before a falling out between them ended the partnership. Brynner then took the concept forward on his own, approaching producer Walter Mirisch with the pitch. Mirisch acquired the rights from Toho Studios and secured distribution through United Artists. Quinn sued Brynner for breach of contract, claiming they had developed the project jointly. The lawsuit was settled. The film Brynner made went on to launch careers, generate 3 sequels, inspire a television series, and produce one of the most recognizable film scores ever written. Fact 2. The rights cost $2,500. The American rights to remake Seven Samurai were acquired by associate producer Lou Morheim for the sum of $2,500. Morheim subsequently sold those rights to Yul Brynner's production company for $10,000 up front, plus $1,000 a week as a producer's fee and 5% of net profits. The original price, $2,500 for the rights to one of the most celebrated films in Japanese cinema history, reflected the limited commercial value that Hollywood at the time placed on foreign language film rights. Kurosawa's film had already been released in the United States, where it had been titled The Magnificent Seven by its American distributors, giving the remake its name before a frame of it had been shot. Fact 3. A blacklisted writer. The first screenplay draft was written by Walter Bernstein, who had been placed on the Hollywood blacklist during the McCarthy era and was unable to work under his own name for much of the 1950s. Bernstein was commissioned to produce a faithful adaptation of Kurosawa's original script. He did so. Brynner and the producers were dissatisfied with the result and brought in Walter Newman to rewrite it. Newman's version was substantially different and is largely what ended up on screen. When the production moved to Mexico for principal photography and Newman declined to travel with it, a third writer, William Roberts, was hired to make further changes required by Mexican censors. Roberts subsequently applied to the Writers Guild of America for a screen credit alongside Newman. Newman responded by asking that his own name be removed from the credits entirely. The film was released with Roberts as the sole credited screenwriter. Fact 4. McQueen faked an injury. Director John Sturges wanted Steve McQueen in the film, having just worked with him on Never So Few in 1959. The problem was that McQueen was contracted to a television series, Wanted Dead or Alive, and the show's actor-producer Dick Powell refused to release him. McQueen resolved this with characteristic directness. On the advice of his agent, he staged a car accident and reported that he had suffered a whiplash injury serious enough to prevent him from working on the series. While wearing a neck brace and recovering from the fabricated injury, he was free to travel to Mexico and film The Magnificent Seven. The deception worked. McQueen appeared in the film. The series continued without him during his absence, and Brynner, who had specifically asked for McQueen to be cast, began regretting the decision almost immediately. Fact 5. Brynner hired a spy. The tension between Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen during production was sustained, deliberate, and increasingly petty. McQueen was dissatisfied with the limited dialogue his character had been given 7 lines in the original shooting script. Sturges had promised to give him the camera, and McQueen took this literally by filling every shared scene with physical business designed to draw attention away from Brynner, rattling his shotgun shells, shielding his eyes with his hat during Brynner's dialogue, flipping a coin while Brynner spoke, and leaning off his horse to dip his hat in a river as the group crossed into Mexico. Brynner was so convinced that McQueen was systematically stealing his scenes that he hired a personal assistant with a single responsibility: to stand on set and count the number of times McQueen touched his hat while Brynner was speaking. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. Most of you watching right now aren't subscribed, and that's the one thing that tells YouTube to show you the next video. One tap, that's all it takes. Fact 6. Brynner's crumbling earth mound. The physical dimension of the Brynner-McQueen rivalry was literal as well as metaphorical. Brynner stood 5 feet 10 inches. McQueen stood 5 feet 9.5 inches, barely an inch shorter. Brynner considered this gap insufficient and was anxious about appearing the same height as his co-star in shared shots. His solution was to have small mounds of earth built beneath his feet in scenes where he and McQueen appeared together, ensuring the camera would show him as measurably taller. McQueen's response was equally simple. Every time he walked past one of these mounds, he kicked it apart. The process repeated throughout production. Brynner's team built a mound, McQueen destroyed it, someone built another one. In 1980, McQueen, dying of cancer, called Brynner to thank him for not having him removed from the production despite the provocations. Fact 7. The whole cast rebelled. Brynner and McQueen's rivalry was contagious and the entire cast caught it. Once it became apparent that stealing scenes attracted attention, Coburn, Bronson, Vaughn, and Buchholz all started finding their own methods of drawing the camera's focus. Director John Sturges later acknowledged that he lost control of his cast almost immediately and never fully regained it. The competitive energy that made the production chaotic also gave the film much of its electricity. An ensemble in which everyone is trying to outshine everyone else tends to produce performances of unusual intensity. What Sturges couldn't manage as a director, he ended up using as a filmmaker. Fact 8. Coburn's obsession with Kurosawa. James Coburn, who plays Britt, the near-silent expert knife thrower who is defined almost entirely by what he does rather than what he says, was a devoted admirer of Kurosawa's original film. By the time he was cast in The Magnificent Seven, he had seen Seven Samurai 15 times while studying acting at the Stella Adler studio in New York. His casting came about through a chance encounter on the street with Robert Vaughn, a fellow former classmate from Los Angeles City College who had already been cast. Vaughn mentioned the production. Coburn expressed interest. Sturges met him. The role of Britt had already been rejected by Sterling Hayden and John Ireland. Coburn took it, made almost nothing of the dialogue, and turned the character into one of the most memorable presences in the film through physical stillness alone. Fact 9. The Bandits adopted Wallach. The villains trusted their leader more than the heroes trusted theirs. Once Eli Wallach appeared on set each morning in full costume as Calvera, the Mexican extras playing the Bandit gang would invite him to ride with them for an hour before shooting began. They treated him as one of their own, something the members of the Seven, playing the heroes, apparently did not experience. More practically, the gang members insisted on personally checking the tack on Wallach's horse and inspecting his prop gun before he was allowed to use either. Wallach had nearly been killed in an earlier production by a poorly maintained prop, and the gang's protective instinct toward their leader extended to ensuring his equipment was safe before each day's work. Fact 10. The score sold cigarettes. Elmer Bernstein's main theme for The Magnificent Seven is among the most instantly recognizable pieces of film music ever composed, ranked by the American Film Institute as the 8th greatest American film score of all time. It did not win the Academy Award for Best Original Score despite its nomination. What the theme did in the years following the film's release was become the primary musical identity of Marlboro cigarette advertising campaigns across multiple countries. The combination of the theme's open, expansive, quintessentially American quality with the Marlboro Man's Western imagery made it a perfect commercial pairing. For decades, the theme was as likely to be heard in a television advertisement as in the film itself. An entire generation grew up associating the music primarily with cigarettes rather than with Brynner, McQueen, or Mexico. Fact 11. John Williams played piano. Among the musicians assembled in Hollywood to record Elmer Bernstein's score for The Magnificent Seven was a young session pianist named John Williams. At the time of the recording, Williams was an in-demand studio musician who supplemented his income by playing on film and television soundtracks. He had not yet begun composing for films himself. His conducting career was still years away. The score he sat down to play as part of the orchestra in 1960 was for a film he had no creative role in producing. Williams would go on to compose the scores for Star Wars, Jaws, Schindler's List, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, and dozens of other films, accumulating more Academy Award nominations than any other composer in history. His first significant contact with film music was playing piano on someone else's score. Fact 12, cast in 5 weeks. 5 weeks before cameras rolled, only 2 of the 7 roles were cast. The Screen Actors Guild had announced a strike set to begin in spring 1960, and the production faced a hard rule. All casting had to be completed by noon on a specific Friday or the film could not proceed. Sturges had Brynner and McQueen. He needed 5 more. The remaining roles were filled at speed, under pressure, without the luxury of extended deliberation. Several of the actors who became central to the film's identity were hired in this atmosphere of urgent necessity, chosen quickly because there was no time left to choose carefully. Fact 13, Brynner rode Stewart's horse. The horse Brynner rode throughout the film had already carried one of Hollywood's biggest stars across some of the most celebrated westerns of the previous decade. The horse, named Pie, had been James Stewart's mount in most or all of Stewart's Western films. When the production team went looking for a suitable animal for Brynner, they found Pie through research into Stewart's riding history. The same horse that had carried Stewart through the defining westerns of the 1950s was then ridden by Brynner through the defining western of 1960. Pie appears to have had no strong opinions about the change of rider. Fact 14, Wallach's secret tell. Eli Wallach was not a practiced Western gunfighter. The specific physical skill that the role of Calvera demanded the ability to draw a revolver and return it smoothly to its holster without looking down was one Wallach did not possess. An experienced Western actor can holster a gun by feel, returning it to the leather without glancing at it. Wallach could not do this reliably and was concerned about the embarrassment of missing the holster on camera during a take. His solution was to look down every single time he returned the gun to the holster. He acknowledged this openly in a DVD documentary about the film. Every scene in which Calvera handles his weapon and returns it ends with Wallach looking down at his own hip. The tell is visible throughout the film, once you know to look for it. Fact 15, most should have died. The original screenplay ended with most of the 7 dead. The final confrontation was written to kill the majority of the group, a conclusion that matched the film's meditation on gunfighters whose era was ending. Then came the test screenings. Audiences were so emotionally invested in the characters that the producers concluded a wholesale killing would be commercially damaging. The ending was rewritten to allow Chris Adams and Vin Tanner to survive and ride away. The change made the film more commercially viable and, many critics argue, slightly less honest. The darker ending was never filmed. The version that exists is the optimistic one, the one the studio needed, not the one the story earned. Fact 16. It flopped domestically. The Magnificent Seven was not a significant domestic success on its initial American release. The film earned approximately $2.25 million in U.S. theatrical rentals, a figure that, while not catastrophic for a production budgeted at around $2 million, represented a disappointing return for a major United Artists release with a cast of Brynner's stature. The film's commercial rescue came from overseas. In Europe, particularly in Britain, France, and Germany, it performed extraordinarily well. In the United Kingdom, it became a television staple, appearing on Christmas and holiday schedules for decades. The international reception transformed the film's financial position and established its reputation as a classic. A film that America initially undervalued was preserved by the enthusiasm of audiences elsewhere. Fact 17, Kurosawa loved the remake. Most directors whose work is remade watch the process with either indifference or quiet resentment. Kurosawa did neither. He saw The Magnificent Seven and praised it publicly as a very fine film in its own right. He and Sturges developed a genuine mutual admiration expressed in interviews on both sides. What made this particularly striking was the circularity involved. Kurosawa had himself acknowledged that Seven Samurai drew on the visual language of John Ford's American westerns. Sturgis's Western adaptation therefore completed the circle. Ford influenced Kurosawa, Kurosawa influenced Sturgis, and the Western form returned to itself transformed by the journey. Fact 18. McQueen's deathbed phone call. In 1980, 20 years after The Magnificent Seven was made and the Brynner-McQueen rivalry had played out across its production, Steve McQueen, dying of mesothelioma at the age of 50, called Yul Brynner by telephone. McQueen told Brynner he was calling to thank him. Brynner asked what for. McQueen's response was to point out that Brynner could have had him removed from the production at any point during filming, given the sustained provocations, the hat touching, the mound kicking, the scene stealing, and the fact that it was Brynner's production company that controlled the film. Instead, Brynner had let him stay. And The Magnificent Seven, McQueen told him, was the film that made him. He died in November 1980. Brynner died in 1985, having recorded a famous public service announcement about smoking that was broadcast after his death. Fact 19. 6 unknowns became stars. At the time of production, only Brynner was a genuine Hollywood star of the first rank. McQueen was known primarily from television. Bronson had appeared in supporting roles without breaking through. Vaughn had an Oscar nomination but was not yet a star. Coburn was almost completely unknown. Dexter was obscure. Buchholz was a German actor with limited American recognition. The Magnificent Seven launched or significantly accelerated all of their careers simultaneously. No single film of the period gave as many performers their defining early exposure. Sturgis assembled a group of men who were not yet famous and made them famous together. Fact 20. The film changed everything. The influence of The Magnificent Seven on the films that followed it is almost impossible to overstate. Sergio Leone saw it and was directly inspired to develop his own approach to the Western, producing A Fistful of Dollars in 1964. The template of a group of skilled individuals assembled to protect the vulnerable against overwhelming odds has been replicated in dozens of films. The Dirty Dozen, Where Eagles Dare, Star Wars, and virtually every ensemble action film made since 1960. The A-Team television series was explicitly described by its creators as a combination of The Dirty Dozen and The Magnificent Seven. A film that flopped domestically, was dismissed as a lesser version of a Japanese classic, and nearly wasn't made due to an actor's strike reshaped the grammar of popular cinema for the next 60 years.